Members of the Parliamentary Staff Association of Nigeria, PASAN, have been protesting at the National Assembly since Monday over what they describe as a breach of agreement by National Assembly management. And according to the association, the agreement was supposed to have resulted in full implementation of the new National Minimum Wage Act 2019 and other allowances contained in the revised conditions of service. The union has also resolved to embark on an indefinite strike commencing from midnight on Sunday, 12th of June 2022. The Secretary of the Human Resources and Staff Development of National Assembly, Mr. Suraj Oladoyin, is however appealing to the union to return to the negotiation table.
This is a struggle that has been going on for on towards 8 years. But we finally reached an agreement in 2018 where the condition of service regarding the activities of staff, their welfare and remunerations were agreed and approved by the National Assembly. And after that, we were awaiting implementation. It didn't take off immediately. We now entered an agreement with management on a staggered implementation. They started that implementation last year, but unfortunately, they stopped doing same this year.
We are not talking of another negotiation. That is not what I'm talking about. Nobody is talking about negotiation. But no matter how difficult a situation is, it is only when we have a meeting ground for us to sit down together and talk.
Welcome to the Gavel. I am Terry Ikumi. Now, while PASAN considers a strike ahead of Tuesday's resumption of plenary, let's take a look at how the National Assembly fared in the past year as we celebrate Democracy Day. The past year saw Nigerians mount extreme pressure on Parliament to pass very critical pieces of legislation. The Electoral Act Amendment Bill is one of the key items of legislation passed, with the intention to further entrench the country's democracy by reforming the electoral process. But the clause on electronic transmission of votes and the resignation of government appointees before taking part in party conventions threatened to derail the entire process. The clause of electronic transmission of vote was eventually passed. However, Section 84, subsection 12, which deals with resignation of political appointees who wish to contest in an election, is still a matter of litigation in court. The late amendment to Section 84, subsection 8, to allow statutory delegates vote in party primaries is also yet to be assented to by the President. Many Nigerians had yearned for the passage of this critical bill, hoping that it can sanitize Nigeria's electoral system by electoral irregularities like violence, ballot box snatching, underage voting, cash for vote, among others.
I think the main contribution that the National Assembly has made is in passing the new Electoral Act. That has enabled us to do a lot more than we could do as civil society organizations in the past.
Even though they had it sent back more than 5 times by this current administration, they still showed commitment to citizens by reworking the bill and sending it back to the President for it to be assent. So I think that's something to be commended.
Civil society organizations also want lawmakers to strengthen the judiciary.
The judiciary is an area that needs more strengthening, especially in terms of the electoral process and how things get distorted along the way.
The Petroleum Industry Bill is another landmark piece of legislation for which the National Assembly gets commended. While it may seem that an applause would be in order for passing these landmark bills, some Nigerians still question the role of the National Assembly in improving the country's democracy or otherwise. These concerns would be largely due to the constitutional amendment bills passed by Parliament, which excluded improving the participation of women in politics and governance. Despite weeks of protests by women at the gate of the National Assembly, which compelled lawmakers to access the complex through the back gate, nothing changed. Although the House of Representatives had backtracked and reconsidered 4 of the 5 gender bills, it amounted to a nullity as they were not passed in the Senate. The contribution of Parliament to the fight against corruption through its oversight functions is, however, brought to question.
Some of the places that National Assembly members are supposed to go and carry out oversight, a lot of concern are brought up. You cannot go to oversight an agency and it is that agency that will give you transport, that will give you per diem, that will give you, what they call sitting allowance and all those kind of things. You have already compromised the integrity of that oversight. And that is why National Assembly has a huge amount resources at their disposal.
It's less than a year to the end of the 9th National Assembly, and while the politicking gets even thicker, it is the hope of Nigerians that Parliament will further entrench the country's growing democracy by living up to its responsibility of proper oversight to improve governance and ensure accountability. We've looked back. Now let's look forward as the 9th National Assembly enters its final months. I speak with Hamzat Lawal, CEO of Connected Development, and advocates for good governance on expectations from the 9th National Assembly amid the politicking that may take up the bulk of the attention of lawmakers.
The 9th National Assembly is one National Assembly that will be quick to be forgotten by the Nigerian people. I think when a historian and political scientists want to reference National Assembly, they would skip them and maybe talk about the 8th National Assembly. And forget them. They would be like a flash that no one even saw their light. And I say this without mising word because sadly the 9th National Assembly have not lived up to expectation. Today we're almost going into anarchy because the National Assembly is not holding the executive to account. There are two important roles that makes of the National Assembly. One is to make laws. But the second role is to provide oversight because we have, without the National Assembly being independent, that means we're not practicing a democracy. But today we have a National Assembly that the executive, it's probably at the beck and call of the executive, where we're not even enjoining public hearings, where we're not seeing public accounts committee, for instance, holding the executive to account. Today we're still ravaged in corruption, and the National Assembly that is meant to provide oversight, and I would like to even trickle it down to constituency projects. Today, look at the report by the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences. We have over 4,000 abandoned constituency projects, and most of these constituency projects are voted by National Assembly members. So for me, the 9th National Assembly, it does not live up to expectation, and it's just a sad reality that taxpayers like you and I, it's just as if our resources were put to use inside a basket, so it all leaked out, and particularly to the Senate. The Senate is one of the worst in Nigerian history, I would say, because of our leadership. We have a leadership that is nonchalant. We have a leadership that ideally should have a vote of no confidence and probably kicked out of office. Yes, the leadership of the Senate, I think that in every sense of whatever honor that is left, is for the leadership to do the honorable thing and resign, or other members of the Senate, because they're equals amongst themselves, and they're the ones who have elected this leadership. Let's have a leadership that probably in the next 365 days, and in the spirit of democracy, they could actually, turn the tides and probably leave a legacy that we might remember them for it.
When you condemn this assembly, maybe specifically the Senate, and say that they've not lived up to expectation, or they've been subservient to the executive, or haven't held the executive to account, could you be a little more specific of what you had expected them to do that they didn't do, or instances where you expected that they should have checked the executive and did not do that?
Terry, I think it's also important I state that I'm not talking about the institution itself, because the institution must be protected by civil society and the Nigerian people. We owe it to that institution. But it's the individuals in this institution that have used this institution for their own personal gain. One, Nigeria have been ravaged by insecurity. What I had expected was for the National Assembly to call for a public hearing, invite the security chiefs. They had an opportunity to send a strong message to the executive, because the security chiefs are answerable to Mr. President and the executive. I remembered when the National Assembly invited the security chief. A lot of them did not show up. Recently, a security chief showed up with a lawyer. Come on. If you as a legislator cannot get security briefing and get informed and aware of what is happening so he can help you legislate on what laws and policies have to be put in place, and also pass motions that would compel the executive to implement.
But by law, is the leadership of the National Assembly entitled to security briefings by the security agencies, or are they only answerable to the Commander-in-Chief?
By law, they are meant to get security briefings. So why do we have Senate and House Committee on the Army?
They don't even belong to the Security Council.
No, still, it doesn't matter. Because when the president is meant to take some decisions, he must, by law, consult with the Senate president and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, particularly where in the case that we are in the act of war. Because right now, you know, let's not deceive ourselves. Nigeria is at war. Today we're dealing with banditry, we're dealing with insurgents, we're dealing with terrorists. So we are actually at war, and all hands must be on deck. And for me, I think the National Assembly plays a bigger role, because for every kobo that the executive would use to tackle this insurgency or this insecurity, the National Assembly must vote on it. They must appropriate every single kobo before the executive can spend. So if the National Assembly is not providing oversight, and mind you, under this administration, we have borrowed a lot of money. We have borrowed money that we can't even pay back because of the current economic status of not just Nigeria, but the world, because of the impact of COVID-19.
Well, let me ask you this question. When you talk about the actions of the executive, the leadership of the National Assembly, and how much they have allocated to security, it would seem that they've done their part. I recall the Senate President at some point, one of the security summit of the House of Representatives, he did say that it was time to begin to check or scrutinize the budget of these security agencies to find out if or not they are utilizing the monies that are being allocated to them for the right purpose. What else would the National Assembly have done? I recall also that the National Assembly had invited the President for a sit-down on this security matter, but the President declined.
Terry, if you're the President, you would decline. But first, let me piggyback to your first question. I think that statement by the Senate President and the leadership of the National Assembly is an indictment to them. So what they're saying is, all this while, they've not been providing oversight in security spending. So they will just legislate and allocate resources in the budget or special intervention. And then they would go and fold their arms and not even ask how these monies are being used, knowing that they all represent, the collective interests of their constituents in the National Assembly. So it's an indictment. And it shows that they're not actually living up to expectations. And if I'm the president, or if you're the president, Terry, why would you show up to a National Assembly that you don't respect? They've lost legitimacy, even right from onset. When most communications that are supposed to come from the executive, it is the Senate President that relate to the Nigerian people. Who made him the spokesperson of the executive? His role is not to relate to the Nigerian people on the cooperation between the executive and the legislature. And of course, I agree that yes, there must be some level of cooperation that that inspires collaboration, and so citizens can enjoy the dividends of democracy. But the separation of power, there's no line. Ideally, there should be a thin line between the executive and the legislature, and we're supposed to see clearly that separation of power. But with Ahmed Lawal's Senate, there's no separation of power. There is no accountability. There are no checks and balances. So if you're the president, why would you honor someone who is more of a puppet to the presidency?
Do you see that with the leadership of the House of Representatives?
No, the leadership of the House of Representatives is someone that actually is visionary and have proven over time. And I think they also have, and they feel the pulse of the Nigerian people, because I've listened to the leadership. We've engaged the leadership of the House of Representatives. I've done a lot of advocacy to members of the House of Representatives, particularly around constituency projects. We've even informed civil society and the House of Representatives a tool that informed, one, how we do needs assessment for constituency projects, how we do joint monitoring and evaluation, and then also do what you call value for money after implementation. But for the Senate, I cannot say the same, which is a shame.
Welcome back. You're watching The Gavel. Let's go back to the conversation with Hamzat Lawal, CEO of Connected Development and advocate for good governance, on the expectations from the 9th National Assembly in its final lap. You know, this point you made has brought me to something that I think our Rafsanjani talked about when he said that most legislators don't even understand how to go about their oversight functions. And that has greatly affected the lawmaking process and, in fact, their entire responsibilities as well. Now, before we talk about your expectations of the National Assembly, in 2023, from the primaries that have been held, we will have quite a large number of newcomers to the National Assembly. What would you say to them in terms of hiring staff that could help them through the legislative, put them through the legislative processes so that they understand the business of lawmaking? Because you find that a lot of them would either hire a family friend, a brother, sister, just to get somebody a job. And at the end of the day, you're just a lawmaker with little or no knowledge of lawmaking.
You know, Terry, it's not only the lawmakers and the National Assembly that suffers this fate. Even some elected executive, because they've failed over time to separate politics from governance. And yes, I can understand that in politics, you did not cling on the ticket and run for that office without support from people around you. And sometimes these politicians think it is payback time. Rather than getting an experienced legislative aide, they would bring, like you said, their friend and family or cronies to come and occupy the position just as payback, saying thank you. But, you know, making laws is not that way. I hope and I believe that the next crop in the 10th National Assembly would look beyond politics and find that balance between politics and governance and lawmaking, where they will recruit the right hands. And I also think that there's a bigger message to the electorate, that what are the antecedents and what are the capacities of the people that we're actually electing to the National Assembly? Are we looking at their background? Or are we looking at, you know, are we carried away by the vote buying and vote selling and the corruption mad with the electoral process? And hopefully, as we go into 2023, our anti-corruption body would be able to curb that, working closely with INEC. But I think that as they come in, they also need to see civil society as their partners. I know that organizations like PLAC have done so much in building capacity and enhancing capacity for legislators as they come in and even as they occupy these offices. I think that if we can find also that balance and mobilize more resources as civil society to provide them with technical know-how, I think that we need to get to a point where Code, for instance, can deploy, you know, technical personnel to the National Assembly to provide assistance, legislative assistance, to ensure that they're able to provide them, you know, with laws and bills that they can pass and debate, and also provide them memos and debriefing, so that when they go to the floor of the National Assembly, they're not debating like they're in the bear parlor, or they're not even going for oversight, expecting that the people they are going to oversight have a pack for them before they arrive.
You know, my concern with this new crop of legislators that will come up, just like we did in the 9th Assembly, we expect to see a lot of them in the 10th Assembly. My concern would be, what impact does this have on continuity in terms of government as far as Parliament is concerned? Because when you have a set of lawmakers with the experience, or those who had just come in at the time and learnt the ropes, and then suddenly they are no longer returning, and then you have a new set of lawmakers coming in, what impact does that have?
Again, you see, our democracy is still young, just over 20 years, and it's still evolving. So, Terry, I think that, you know, as we make progress, I think that we would understand those gaps and look at how we can curb the gaps. Yes, it would make sense to have plenty returning legislators who already understand the institution and who can give value to our democracy. But I also think that if you don't do well, why would you be given another chance? And come to think of it, it is not their birthright, you know, to retain in the National Assembly. Democracy and the citizens will choose who they believe should lead them. I think rather if we invest more in the electorate and the citizens that go to cast their ballot, probably we would get very fine hands that come and legislate the affairs of Nigeria.
Do you think that it's the electorate that's responsible for returning or not returning these legislators based on their performance? Because the concerns for many would be the influence of the state governors in returning these legislators or otherwise.
Terry, it's really tricky. And I think this is also a way that the 9th National Assembly can make history. It is tricky because, yes, the executive governors always hijack the process because most of the party chairmen are loyal to the executive governors because politically they are the leaders of the party in their state. So they dictate and decide who gets what, when, and how. So who goes to the Senate? Who goes to the House of Rep? Who goes to the State Assembly? But if our Ninth Assembly wants to, make a dent that is sustainable, mind you, when we did the campaign for the Not Too Young to Run movement and the age reduction bill, there were two important legislation, but it's only one that saw the light of the day that had age reduction. We actually introduced independent candidacy, where you don't have to belong to any political party. So if you're an individual like Hamza, and you have your own ideal, your vision, and your principle, it means you can come out not under a political party. So probably the 9th National Assembly can make history and set that precedent, introducing a bill to ensure independent candidacy, but also setting criteria of what becomes an independent candidate, so that we can start electing people not under any party lineage, but under an independent candidate that actually represents the collective interest of he or her constituents.
There's something else that I think we should talk about, and that's the lawmakers who have been there for a long time. There are those who are serving their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th term, and I'm wondering, I know you had talked about performance and all that. I'm wondering, is that good for Parliament? Is that good for the democracy of the country?
I think continuity is good, but I don't think that, again, it is not you and I's decision to make. What is important is what are we learning from this process, and how are we measuring what value these people bring, that they've been successively in all the National Assembly since 1999 that Nigeria went back into democracy. I think that we need to document what are we learning from them and how are they contributing and what difference does this make. And probably we can use this to make a case to constituents and the electorate. So I believe that, I think that there's something there that we can learn from and probably showcase and highlight these people. And so Nigeria can probably start appreciating the fact that when you return lawmakers successively, there can be some ripple effects and some positive changes that would happen.
What sort of awareness can be created in such a way that the electorate know that there's a process of recall that they can initiate and implement? Because I think that that's lacking as well. So you find lawmakers believing that they can do what they want, and at the end of the day, they could last the entire 4 years and then probably find their way around it. But the process of recall, I don't know if you're aware, you've worked with Nigerians at that really low level. Do you think there is an awareness among Nigerians, especially in the rural areas, that the process of recall is possible?
Oh, it is possible.
Of course it's possible. Are they aware?
No, they're not aware. And Terry, the gap was first from, do electorates even know the role of members of parliament, both at the state level and the national level? And I think that politicians are also cashing in on the fact that electorate does not even know the roles that they come for. Because see, I've been to a lot of town hall meetings where you see lawmakers or intending lawmakers promise that they're going to build schools, they're going to tile roads, That's not their job. But because they need to sway voters, so they promise what they cannot give. And that's why you see there's a lot of pressure on National Assembly members, particularly from their constituents. So I think first is to educate the electorate and the constituents that these are the roles of lawmakers at the National Assembly and the State Assembly. These are what is expected of them. And this is also what is expected of you. And if they don't do what is expected of them, these are the processes to recall them. I know that, Kogi State governor, the people of Kogi State, I would say, try to recall at some point, Senator Dine Malayi. And you see a lot of resources and a lot of process went into it, which later didn't see the light of the day. But we all know that was politics, playing. I think most importantly, if electorate knows the role of legislators, particularly in state assembly, then we will not have governors that are warlords. We will not have presidents, that are demigods. And we'll have citizens that hold, their legislators to account, knowing that they can recall them. Because that's powerful. If citizens today know that we can recall the Senate president, I'm sure that they would have even started that proceeding before they resume next week.
Well, that's it on the Gavel. Plenary resumes in both chambers on Tuesday, the 14th of June. Remember to send feedback to the Gavel at channelstv.com. I'm Terry Ikumi. Goodbye. Happy Democracy Day.